I am Jason Bradford, host of The Reality Report. I believe that solving a problem begins by facing the truth about its real causes. Our society is pressing against ecological and energetic constraints. We are at an historic inflection point in which decisions made today will have profound impacts for centuries to come. The Reality Report is recorded in the studios of KZYXNZ in Mendocino County, California, and is a long-format interview program of key thinkers of our time. All right, welcome to the show. This is the Reality Report. It's May 18th, 2009. All right, today I am really pleased to have two guests. I've read both their books recently. One is Peter Lawrence. He lives in the Bay Area. His book is called The Happy Minimalist: Financial Independence, Good Health, and a Better Planet for Us All. And the website is thehappyminimalist.net. And the other guest, he is on the East Coast. His name is Jim Merkel, and he is the author of Radical Simplicity: Small Footprints on a Finite Earth. And his website is www.radicalsimplicity.org. Just to remind everybody that today's and previous shows can be heard online at www.globalpublicmedia.com. So, Jim and Peter, do you hear me all right?
Yes.
All right, great. So we've got good phone connections, and I just want to set up why I have you guys on this program. Basically, I was thinking about how as the global economy is continuing to decline, many families are being forced to cut spending and reduce waste. And you see articles about people sort of being forced to cut back, losing homes, or just, no longer having their credit card available to them, etc. And so my guests today, Jim Merkel and Peter Lawrence, have both written books about their experience of voluntarily living with less income and expenses. So my thought was that can those now having to reorganize their lives learn how to feel healthy, happy, and secure with much less money? So I want to thank both of you, Jim and Peter, for being on the program.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
I'm glad to be here. Yeah,
Good.
Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, just make sure you guys get snuggle up to your phone there, and we'll get a good clear signal coming through. So, in reading both of your books, I noticed that you both went through a path of being pretty successful in the regular economy, and you basically gave up well-paying jobs, which a lot of folks nowadays are saying, well, why would somebody do that? Can you each tell us what you were doing before you sort of decided to change your life?
Well, this is Jim here, and I was an electrical engineer, and I was designing top-secret military electronics. And at the time, I had a speedboat, a motorcycle, an antique car. I bought a fourplex as an investment. I owned a duplex, and I was a bike racer, and kind of I'd say an all-around late 20s playboy.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's quite a change. Now, how about you, Peter?
So, for me, most of my working life has been with Hewlett-Packard, and most of it has been in various marketing functions. My last role was as an alliance manager for HP's personal systems group.
Okay. And you grew up in Singapore, is that right?
Yes, I was born and raised in Singapore. In 1997, HP relocated me to the Bay Area.
Okay. Wow. So you've only been in the United States for about 12 years then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you each faced apparently some sense of discontent with what our society defines as the good life. And I'm just wondering if there were profound moments that got you going in a new direction, or was it more of a gradual development, or a bit of both? And why don't you go again and start first, Jim?
Yeah, well, for me, I was a young Republican kid. I had voted for Ronald Reagan, and my first time I could vote. And I kind of thought that might made right. And until I got actually selling top-secret electronics to foreign militaries in Europe, I realized that we're the largest arms dealer on the earth, bar none. We sell the most weaponry to other countries, and we actually, at the time, were running 50 covert operations to destabilize other countries to get the flow of resources toward America to flow better. So I was having a slow, I would say at first, wake-up call. the things I believed I found by firsthand experience not to be true. But then actually it started slow, and then it started accelerating. I would meet people in my town who were coming back from Nicaragua and El Salvador and telling me about death squads that were funded by the U.S., and then at the same time, the equipment I had designed was being used by Ollie North to communicate secrets and fund the Contras illegally. So I was starting to have this ethical dilemma. Mm. And what actually happened was when the Valdez oil spill hit, it just was the straw that broke the camel's back. And I had done 7 intercontinental flights that 1 year, and I realized I just looked at myself in the mirror at this bar. I was in Stockholm, Sweden, when the Valdez oil spill hit, selling to the Swedish military, and I said, my God, I'm part of this.
Wow.
I drive my car 3 miles to work every day. Mm-hmm. And I knew I had to change. I didn't know what to do, so I finally, when I got home, I parked the car. A few weeks later, I locked myself in my house, and I asked myself the question, how much do I need? And when I ran the numbers, because I was used to doing multi-million-dollar business deals, I realized I could live on $5,000 a year if I was to rent 3 of the 4 rooms of my house out, take the car off the road, and start planting a vegetable garden. So I actually went in on Monday after running the numbers and quit, and that was 20 years ago. So I put a plan together then that meant I could live off the interest stream from what I saved by the age of 30, and I still haven't touched that original nest egg. So it's fun 20 years.
That was kind of a cold turkey experience then for you. That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I had 13 yard sales to get rid of stuff.
Right. Okay. Fascinating. Peter, why don't you go ahead?
So mine is kind of different. Mine started when I was a kid. I come from a family of 7. I was about 7 years old when my dad lost his job, and he was the only breadwinner. Young as I was, it did not take me long even then to realize the stress and pressure my parents must have faced. Mm. I made a decision early on in my life that I do not want to be dependent on someone else forever for my livelihood. So financial independence became a key motivator. Mm. Consequently, most of my life, for the most part, I've lived a simple life because that is one way to reach financial independence sooner. Some of the extreme measures that I took happened about 5 or 6 years ago when I had to move myself. Prior to that, the company had taken care of all my relocations. So when I had to move myself, that's when I realized most of this stuff gives me more headache than benefit. So I simplified to the point that I can fit everything I own in my compact-sized car.
Yeah.
So bear in mind, until this point, all my decisions were motivated both by my personal spiritual beliefs as well as the tangible financial advantage of living simply.
Yeah.
The lifestyle each of us has on the planet only became aware or became more apparent to me as I researched for my book. And in researching, I became acutely aware of some data. I mean, the most common one is that if everybody consumed like the average American, we will need 5 to 6 planets.
Yeah.
And then, besides the danger of depleting our natural resources, the other concern I had was also how our increased consumption was adding to the pollution. Mm-hmm. More than 80,000 chemicals have been introduced into our society since 1900, yet only 550 has been tested for safety.
Yeah.
And none of them has been tested for synergistic health impacts. And even according to EPA itself, about 2.5 billion pounds of toxic chemicals are released every year by large industrial facilities. So by the time I was done with my book, I became more convinced than ever that I'm living the right way by consuming less. Mm-hmm. Now I just need to convince others.
Yeah, that's tough. Now, it's interesting. Jim, your book is much more detailed about those kind of statistics that Peter just went over. How did you get into sort of looking at the ecological footprint analysis and those sort of things?
Well, I'm a recovering engineer, I call myself now. And so my burning question since 1989 when I quit my job was, what would be a fair and equitable slice of the biosphere for me to take? Because when I quit, I had a lot of time to do soul searching, and I said, can I earn the right to take more because, say, my education, 8 years in college, or because I'm white, because I'm an American, because I have the biggest military on planet Earth behind me, all these reasons, because of my family. My father was a truck driver, but they, gave me a work ethic. So I just said to myself, no, I don't have the right to take more. So I was searching for a way to quantify my own impact so I wouldn't be hot air. Like I'm the kind who wants to have transparency. Like if I say I'm sustainable, I want to be able to show with numbers I'm sustainable. And I didn't know how to do it. And I meet this guy, Dr. William Rees. He's a department head at UBC. And I had returned from India to study culture there, very sustainable in Kerala. And Bill Rees invited me to his class to speak to his master's students. I arrive at the bicycle rack on a pouring, raining day on my bicycle. I'm bike touring all over the Pacific Northwest doing these slideshows in '94. And Bill shows up to the bike rack at the same time, takes off this poncho. I'd never met him, but I was to be in his class that day. He says, Jim, excuse me, is this Jim? And I said, yeah. And he says, Bill. And I knew immediately, this man gets it. And he had developed this methodology to assess how big our impact is. Looking at what does it take to support my life, including all the resources for food, housing, transportation, computers, insurance, healthcare, and how much earth does it take to absorb the waste. This was perfect, the methodology. It's exactly what I was hoping I would find. Now I didn't have to invent it, and so I began to utilize it. So in '96, I started a research team that actually, in the mountains of British Columbia, a group of educators and students, college students, would live for a 6-week period, quantifying every single item they consumed. And we said that suffering is optional. You could take the shower for 6 hours if you want. You just write 6 hours on your footprint sheet. And there was no eco-police. So we kept it very light and fun. But when we would make a fire in the evening, around the fire circle, we'd weigh every stick of wood that went in the fire. By the end of the 6 weeks, we knew our exact footprint. So we were having, on average, our team got down to 3-acre footprints, or the average American is 24.
Yeah.
So we were just above someone from India, just below someone from China, and then we had 5 teams do this in 5 different years, and the teams reported overwhelmingly a higher quality of life than their life in the city.
Yeah.
By this. And so we were convinced, our first question, is it possible to live a sustainable life, considering all humans, all other species, and future generations, and have a good quality of life? So we answered the question, yes. And then just like Peter has said, our next question got to be, well, how do we engage others in also joining?
Okay. Well, why don't we talk a little bit about each of your lives, and why don't we have Peter go first? Describe your current living arrangement, what your typical day might be like, and if you still need to earn some money, how much is required? What does your home look like, and what do you do each day?
Yeah, so unlike Jim, I just retired, so-called left the workforce last year, right? But even before I left, I've been living in a small place, which is a 1-bedroom, 1-bath condominium, and that hasn't changed. I still have a compact-sized car. The major differences are that, I don't have to drive now as often because I don't have to drive to work. The other one is, when I was working, I used to take my lunch outside. Now I cook my own meals. And the other difference when it comes to eating is before I used to have 3 big meals. Now I have small meals throughout the day. Right? They say it's actually better for your health. And finally, I have a lot of free time, and it's kind of split between some community activities as well as reading. I read a lot, and the more I read, the more I realize, the more I don't know. So it's very humbling. But as far as to the question on whether I need extra source of income, not yet. my kind of fashion my model as what Jim kind of described. Although in my case, once in a while I do dip into my principle, but it's not that much to have any concerns.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's a picture of your condo in your book.
Yeah.
And it's just really Spartan. So I'm just wondering if you give some folks some concept.
So, I mean, imagine if you're going to be able to fit everything in your car.
Yeah.
Right? So you really have to ask yourself, what do you really need, right?
Yeah.
So, it's unfortunate that our tradition and our culture, pop culture, right, sometimes they can be to our advantage, but sometimes they are to our disadvantage, right?
Mm-hmm.
We just go along with whatever tradition has taught us as well as what pop culture is expecting out of us.
Right.
So if you were to start from a clean slate and ask yourself, what is it really that you need and how best you can achieve it, then you realize that a lot of stuff you actually don't need, right?
Right.
So the extreme case, right, I use the word extreme because this is the one that I have lively debate with a lot of my friends, is the whole notion of bed, right? For me, my sleeping bag is my bed, and I'm perfectly comfortable with it, right?
Yeah.
I don't need sleeping tablets to make me go to sleep, right? I don't toss and turn. I don't suffer from insomnia. I don't need an alarm to wake me up. And when I wake up, I'm not suffering from any aches and pains, right? So the bed actually doesn't really serve that much purpose. And people say a firm mattress is important.
Yeah.
What's more firmer than your floor?
I actually have a friend who tends to sleep in his sleeping bag and just use a camping pad. So you're not the first person I know of who does that. You have others like you in this world. That's
It's very comfortable, especially in winter. You got to try it.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to come out of the closet and say I'm sleeping on a pad in a sleeping bag right now too.
All right.
Well, why don't Jim? Why don't you go ahead and talk about what your living arrangements like? Now, you're more of in a rural situation, whereas Peter is in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Yeah, I'm living up in the hills of Vermont, and I've got a small cabin which is 14 by 16, so it's probably smaller than most people's living room, and it's 2-story. It's got a little mudroom attached, but I love Peter's example of this. Oh, I can fit it all in a car. He's simpler than me. I can fit it. All my stuff probably would take 2 regular minivans maybe. But I garden and I grow quite a bit of my own food. So I do, and I have a root cellar to store the roots in. Outside, and holes dug in the earth where I put all my potatoes and beets and carrots and kohlrabi and cabbages, apples, pears, tons and tons of food in there that I grow, and I store that for the whole winter, and they keep all winter really nice. And, I do keep a small car on the road. It's a 1992 Honda Civic I bought used, and it gets about 40 to 45 miles per gallon. And I try to keep it, I joke with my friends that I leave the one tire flat, so if I want to take it, I've got to pump it up with a bike pump.
Yeah.
But just to try to keep out of it as much as possible, and I bicycle. I worked at Dartmouth College for 2 years as their sustainability coordinator, so I moved to this cabin to be within cycling distance. It was a 7-mile cycle, and I did it year-round in even minus 10 degree Fahrenheit winters, and I just got really good warm clothing. And I like to have some playfulness with it because my friends often say, how can you ride? But they get a season pass for the ski hill, which they pay $1,400 for, and it's very cold in Vermont on the ski hill.
Yeah.
So I don't do much suffering. It's quite a beautiful, simple life. And, I would say, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. You guys talk about fitting stuff in vehicles. I remember going from college to graduate school and having to take all my possessions and put them in one vehicle, and it worked, and I don't remember suffering as a student. In fact, it was quite nice time. So yeah, I think back to then and how much I've accumulated over the years, and it just sort of adds up. As you get older, it seems like more stuff enters your life at a faster rate than you dispose of it. So it's really hard to keep it out of your life.
It is.
It's tough.
For me, actually, the ultimate goal is not even to be able to fit into your car, right? Whenever I autograph people's book, I write this Latin phrase, which is omni mea mecum porto. And what it means is everything I own, I carry.
Ah, yeah. That's great.
That's even more powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nice. I love it.
Well, most Americans would probably be listening to you guys and saying, this change you've gone through is a real loss. I mean, you had the American dream, and now you're essentially living in conditions of material poverty. I mean, you don't sound like you feel deprived. I mean, what does it feel like? How does it feel different compared to your past lives?
Well, for me, it's just amazing. I'm 20 years now not working for money, and the last 20 years have been just so full and amazing. Like the things that I've done in my life, I just can't even believe. Sometimes I feel like I lived 6 lifetimes in one, because I've had my freedom. And even though I grow my food, I wash my clothes in a bucket and by hand, and I'd like to do simple things like bread labor, just working by hand. I fix my house myself, fix the car myself. I do all these. I like to tinker in that, but I've been able to volunteer over 20,000 hours over the last 20 years. So I've had a tremendous free time. I've cycled all over Mexico. I've crossed the continent twice by bicycle, and I, when I want to go to the mountains, I can go to the mountains. And when I feel like I need to work on peace and justice, when America's at war, I can work on that. So it's been, to me, the most difficult thing is to try to love a job that you hate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. Yeah. Or to try to earn enough money to live a $40,000 or $30,000 a year lifestyle, like then a 20-hour work week doesn't cut it. You have to go to 30 or 40-hour work week, and the more you simplify, the less you have to work. And so, to me, it's just like my governor, Peters, was in the car. Say, my friend calls us the governors. So the kids in the go-kart, the parent puts a governor, so because the kids would just go so fast they kill themselves.
Yeah.
So we need a governor sometime in this culture. So for me, it's like when I said I'm going to live on $5,000 a year back in 1989, it meant I have to organize my life way different. But if I do that, I don't have to go out and earn money again. So, but the advantage is it puts me at a par with all the world's people. I'm at the same average GDP.
Yeah.
So I have a chance to see how others have to do. But still, I'm 10 times richer than 60% of humanity.
Uh-huh.
So 60% live on just $520 a year.
Yeah.
And my 5,000 puts me in the richest 17% of all the people on planet Earth. So I am excessively rich.
Yeah.
And I have savings. And when something happens, I can dip into my principal if I need to, just like Peter said. And occasionally I do, but then it's easy to recover.
Yeah. Okay. Now, it doesn't sound like materially you change as much, Peter, as Jim, but yeah. Obviously you have more free time, etc. So what's it been like for you?
So, I mean, on this question on, whether you feel deprived compared to your past life, I think the whole thing is you need a total change in mindset. So I wear glasses. I need glasses because my eyesight is poor. Similarly, someone may need a hearing aid if he has hearing problems. So we usually need something because we lack something, or at least we think we lack. So the reverse of it is that not needing to have something actually makes us stronger or better. So I feel liberated when I wake up every morning knowing that I don't need to go to work. I feel extremely blessed that I don't need any drugs, prescribed or otherwise. And I'm thrilled to know that my happiness is not dependent on more stuff. So this is the best time in my life.
Yeah.
Hallelujah.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole medical thing is very interesting. You talk about being able to spend so much time eating well and relaxing, and doing all these things that physicians say this is the best preventive medicine,
Yeah,
walk and bike and eat nice and relax.
I can easily give a lecture 1 hour on this whole pharmaceutical industry, right? I mean, North America is $300 billion. And the best healthcare plan that we can have is for people to eat and exercise well.
Yeah.
That will solve over 90% of the problems.
And sleep well on your sleeping bag on the floor. Yeah. No, that's great. So you are listening to KZYX Philo, KZYZ Willis and Ukiah. This is the Reality Report, and I'm your host, Jason Bradford. And today we're talking about simplifying lives. As the economy shrinks, so does our consumption. And do we view this as a bad thing or an opportunity? Jim Merkel and Peter Lawrence chose to earn less money and live more simply. We're finding out how they do it and what they think about it, how they like it. So let's get into the psychology of change. I mean, humans are social animals. And I'm wondering if it's a bit difficult to set yourselves apart from what most people are doing. And if you get resistance from friends and family over making a lifestyle choice that might make them feel uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've chosen to be light with it and playful. So when I first quit my job, people would ask, "Where are you going?" Because they always want to hear the rumor of how you're going to get more money in another company. And instead, I said, I'm retiring. And at 30 years old, they just couldn't believe it. So they say, "What do you mean?" And I told them how I did it. I earned enough to live off my interest, and I cut my spending. And they say, "Oh, that'll never work." And they tell me all these things. And I said, "Well, if you ever see me under the creek in a sleeping bag, throw me half a sandwich." But just to be playful, and I maintain those friendships, and with people from my past life, and I don't try to preach to them or my family. When I was in my preaching mode, I would walk down the street and I'd see my friends ducking down the alley so they wouldn't have to hear another speech from me. And so I slowly gave up the speeches to friends and family, and if someone invites me to give a speech, I'll do it.
Mm-hmm.
But I know it is difficult still because we're in a sea of overconsumption. America, we live in this place, and you could live at the forest mountains and not have a television, and you think you're away from it, and your kids could even never see the TV. But as soon as your kids play with the kids who have a TV, and they're shooting each other with guns and make believe, and they're acting out, your kid will come home and have the culture right inside of him.
Yeah.
So we can't escape because the air is thick with overconsumption and unhappiness and some crazy hope that all this buying and consumerism will make us happy when it never will. So it is, I think, you cannot escape it. So the best is how to live in two worlds. And the more I think we understand our own, like I have to meditate all the time, like day by day, I have to take some time to meditate so I don't feel the own anxiety brewing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The more I feel peaceful and, say, present and in the now and not worrying about the future and not dreading the past and be centered in the now, watching the birds, and then when I go to work on something, I'm present and working on this and not thinking of something else. I know that helps me a lot because I don't think you'll magically be happy just because you have freedom like I have. You can still have the psychosis of an American who's got an overachiever, part of an overachiever culture, family, whatever. So I think it's just, for me, steady work.
Yeah. How about you, Peter?
Yeah, it's kind of similar to Jim. I mean, I'm also lucky in the sense that I have good family and friends. Although they may not live like I do, to a certain extent they can understand my logic.
Mm-hmm.
And the reaction varies from, admiration, envy to disbelief, right? I know at least I have inspired some people to make some changes, right? And then on the very extreme end, there are at least two people that have made bets that within 2 years I'll return to the workforce. Their theory is that I'll get bored and I'll go around traveling the world, squander my money, and then come back to work with my tail tucked between my legs. So 1 year is coming. Next month is my first anniversary.
Yeah.
I just have to go 1 more year before they pay up.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm wondering if people give you guys gifts. Do you get gifts and just go, oh no, they don't understand. I'm trying to have everything be simple, and now I've got this I don't know, thingamajig. What do you do about situations where gift giving is obligatory for a lot of people, and it's just a piece of junk for you, maybe?
It's hard. Yeah, well, my family, my mom, we had 9 kids, so 2 more than Peter's 7.
Wow.
So, but with Dad as a truck driver, we had frugality in the house, and my mom said at 14 she's canceling Christmas because we would buy presents for all 9 of our siblings, 8 of them, and we liked it. But then we just said, let's get together and sing and make cookies and make a big party. And we all had more fun without the gifts at 14, even young kids. And so I have been out of the gift, but then when I would have a partner and a new lady friend and go to her family and they're giving me gifts, and then I'd feel bad because I didn't buy the gift too. And so sometimes what I'll do is I make extra maple syrup or honey from my bees, and then I have jars of like honey or maple syrup to give away.
Yeah.
And I feel like I can be part of that. You know, reciprocation and gifts are beautiful, but I don't want to go to the store. I can't. When I go in to buy a gift for someone, if I ever feel, every now and then it comes up, well, oh my God, I better. They're getting married, and what am I to do?
Yeah.
I have a struggle, you know, and usually I end up trying to find some homemade thing I can offer.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything about you, Peter?
No, I think so far I've kind of trained my folks quite well. I don't run into many challenges. I mean, my 2 nephews, they are a great example. I mean, they are kind of grown, so when I visited them for Thanksgiving, I said, you know, I'm not going to give you anything, but I'm going to take you out for a meal and teach you some important things about financial independence. So I gave them, you know, like some of the basic financial, finance know-how, because, you know, schools don't teach you this kind of stuff.
Yeah, they don't.
The one gift I feel free with is my time.
Yeah.
And so, you know, having a book out, I get tons and tons of emails, and I do maybe 70 or more public speaking events a year. And so I'm all over the place on college campuses and things like this. And I get students, I give them my email, and I say, you know, I call and I'll go out and have coffee with people who are struggling with they want to consult me and pay me. And I'm like, no, just, you know, or I can go over and help people with their gardens and, you know, help on a building project. My friend here is building a greenhouse, and I'm going over Wednesday to help with that. So, you know, I like to be in the reciprocation thing, but it's my time that I have so much freedom with.
That's great.
And a gift of time is very beautiful, I think, and also trying to be present, you know, so when you're with your friend, you just feel so there. You know, you really, like, look in the eyes and you see and you smile and you feel their energy and how beautiful it is, and you feel all this gratitude welling up that you have this nice afternoon with someone you really love.
Yeah. One of the tensions that I feel sometimes is that you guys are talking about how it's uncomfortable sometimes with others, but you don't push them too hard. And, you know, when you're given a formal speaking engagement, you can just lay it out, but usually you don't. You kind of hold back and just lead like an example. What about, you know, the knowledge that for the planet to be okay, others need to cut back on consumption also? Does that make it a little more difficult to just relax around when you see really conspicuous consumption?
Oh, yeah. For me, it's tough, but I try to keep this energy of, for a while on the bicycle, I would, you know, curse at the SUVs, you know. Yeah. And then you are like the martyr on the bike. Oh, my God, I am the angel, and all these people are terrible. And you feel how poison you feel internally to hold bad opinion of others. And so I learned, you know, this martyrdom is really useless and destructive. And then to try to feel like, oh, I'm the hero, and all these others are the mainstream, and they don't care, but I do. it's a very false and inflated opinion of yourself. When I hear people say, what are you going to do about all those masses who don't care? And I'm like, when I go out and talk to people, they could be a Republican, or they can be a ultra-conservative, or have strong religious beliefs that are different than mine. When we start talking about the essence of these ideas of simplicity, I find we're usually nodding heads together. You know, my parents are ultra right-wing. They're like right of Rush Limbaugh, my dad would say. And they gave my book to 100 people, you know. They bragged that, oh, their son rides across the country. You know, first they were bragging he was arms dealer. Now they're bragging that he's riding his bike across the country.
Yeah.
Because they like, I know conservatives, they like people who aren't like saying one thing and believing something else, like build a big house up on the hill, and then they don't want anyone new in town.
Yeah, they don't like hypocrisy.
They don't like hypocrisy. So when I ride my bike and then I talk about pollution and air quality, then they say, well, how did you get here? And I said, I rode the bike.
Yeah.
And then we can start a conversation. Yeah. Not like I rode the bike, I'm better, but just I am trying. I'm not perfect or anything. You know, that's really clear. Like, we're all trying together.
Mm-hmm.
And I take it as a given. Like the Dalai Lama says, assume everyone is more virtuous than yourself. Mm. And if you make that assumption, you know, I see people everywhere really care, but they aren't sure what to do. And then you also know 99.5% have TVs. It's on every day. It's on 8 hours a day on average in the house.
Yeah.
And they see 360,000 TV commercials before they graduate high school. And then 93% of the girls say their favorite thing is to shop. And you know it's not the girls' problem, but the society is, you know, they have people with masters and PhDs designed to, they call it the nag factor in their college classes. They learn how to increase children's nagging because they know so much consumption happens when a kid can nag the parents effectively. Mm-hmm. So the advertisers are teaching this in the university how to more effectively get the kids to nag.
Yeah.
This is taught in university.
Yeah.
So you know, when you know all this, you know how that it's not people's fault that they're over-consuming. So you don't feel like, oh, that's a bad person. And I don't pity either, because that's a terrible energy to pity anyone. But then to realize why, behind the scene, why is this happening? Why are they feeling they need to consume? And I also felt I needed to consume at one point, so I have empathy. Mm-hmm. And then realize it's not going to happen overnight. And then sometimes we learn these little nuggets. Sometimes you read a book and you read one line, and that line can't leave your head. And it just haunts you. And then for weeks and weeks, you're mulling this line over, and then all of a sudden you see the world with new eyes. And all us writers or speakers or just any average person can start to think of those little, what are those little things that work for you to help you switch?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. It's a tough balance, that's for sure. And I'm glad you have a lot of time to meditate. And it's interesting. And Peter, you've been doing this for more like a year now, as opposed to 20 years like Jim. What sort of stage of acceptance or frustration are you in right now for communicating to others?
Yeah, so I think there are two things. One is people are of this mindset where their success is measured on having more toys, right? So as long as that is the metric of success, they are going to be pursuing down that road. The other thing is people, I don't think they realize, I guess, the urgency to change until a crisis happens. Then they are kind of forced to change, right? So as long as nothing happens, people will just keep on doing what they are doing, because at the end of the day, human beings are creatures of habit, right? So I think those are the two things that I kind of realized as I talk to different people.
Yeah, they can sort of admit that sometimes if you give them new information that they've got big problems, but they go home and they're in their environment and they're in their habit space and they've got the TV on, like it's a habit to turn on, and it's sort of your voice versus a lifetime of marketing. Yeah. It's tough. It's really tough. Now, I'm imagining that as people lose their jobs, they might start feeling shame and fear. And by contrast, you made a choice to simplify your lives and need less. How important is it for people to feel a sense of control or ownership over the process of cutting back on material consumption if they're going to look at this as a positive experience rather than a terrible loss?
Well, the human is very resilient, I find. So, like, sometimes people say, oh, don't say that to, my brother would say, don't say that to Mom, she can't handle it. Well, my mom had 9 kids. She can handle it. And I think humans, so I've heard these interviews on, I don't have a TV, but I've seen it just like I'm passing a TV in the airport or, at a friend's house or something, people saying, okay, I lost the job, and now I'm not jumping in the car to go to the corner store just to buy milk. I'm making a good list, and I'm walking more, and I'm feeling a little thinner, and I'm actually feeling good because I was overweight.
Mm-hmm.
So I do hear these people are resilient, and they rise to occasions. Like if there's a disaster, an earthquake in Santa Cruz, everyone gets together and helps. So I think this people. It is good to be in control, but when they lose control, sometimes it forces the change.
Right.
So like it's almost like this economy now is a bit like a depression, economic depression, but it's like a personal depression happens because you're living something that's false. Like when you're hyperinflated and you have this huge ego and you're running around the world with this big ego, and then all of a sudden you realize, wow, it's not true.
Mm.
I've created this part of me that's not really a true thing, and I can't sustain it. So you go into depression, and just like our economy was way out of line with what could be sustained, and it's all having to readjust.
Yeah, and people are somewhat accepting that, it sounds like. But there's probably people with fighting it like crazy, just like there's a huge range of reactions,
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Peter, any thoughts on this?
Kind of. Jim already touched on it, but if people see what they are cutting back as a sacrifice or deprivation, then it will not last. Just like diets.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as during this forced change period, just like the example that Jim gave, when they actually begin to realize some of the benefits of this so-called simple life,
yeah,
and that convinces them to change, then this crisis wouldn't have been a waste, right?
Yeah.
It will have been. We will have learned something out of this crisis. But it is sad if it is seen as a sacrifice or a deprivation, and they don't learn anything, right?
Right.
And that's why I kind of remember this Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu, right, when he said, plan for difficulty while it is easy, manage the great while it's small, right?
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully, this will give people the chance to make changes that will become permanent,
right,
down the road.
I've heard there was an article in the New York Times about a woman who had started to do that. It was pretty interesting. Or ABC News actually had it. So you're starting to see the popular press talk about this a little bit too. Of course, by the same token, there's a great irony in that the federal government and the Federal Reserve are trying to get the economy back to where it was, reinvigorating the same banks that overextended credit to this vast array of consumers. And I'm just, thinking that people can choose not to go back into debt if they learn how to live without it. And I'm just wondering if our society has learned enough yet from this crisis to avoid making the same mistakes, or are we still hoping that sort of all the king's men out there can fix this Humpty Dumpty economic situation we've got?
Well, I think it's in a way sad to hear Obama trying to encourage people that, the stimulus package, and he wants people to stimulate spending and not save it. They're trying to figure out a way to make you not save it if they give it to you.
Yeah.
And we have the lowest savings rate of all industrialized nations, and so they're saying, okay, these really nice guys with these huge corporations, they're struggling. Let's all share their risk and make our lives risky to support them, keeping their high lifestyle.
Yeah.
And they're saying this is good for everyone, and they're too big to fail. And it's the silliest and the most opposite of what is actually true. They've been built. They haven't decided to make efficient cars, and they should go out of business if they can't. And if it's things that are not needed for our society, it's actually excellent for them to fail. But it's sad that the best of the Democrats really now are still even thinking that they want to keep this old system based on economic growth alive, because I just say it's this easy. Call NASA, 1-800-NASA hotline. Say, how many livable planets? Ask them, how many livable planets?
Yeah.
The person looks at the cheat sheet, says, 1. Then you say, is that planet growing year after year? And they say, look at the cheat sheet, and no, they measure that from space, and it's not growing. And is it getting more biologically productive each year? No, it's actually getting less, because we're building on big boxes on the best soils.
Mm-hmm.
So, this economic growth on a finite Earth is the ideology of a cancer cell.
Yeah.
It's mass suicide, and then we have the opportunity. So it's interesting that people, even though gas prices are down, they keep their spending, their gas is lower still.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, I think people are smarter than the government right now, and they know it's the riskiest thing for them to do is what the government's trying to tell them to do.
Mm-hmm.
Is to go out on a limb.
Yeah. So I agree with that. So despite whatever the government is trying to do, there is some glimmer of hope in the sense that people are actually wisening up. I mean, at some point a few years ago, our savings rate fell below 0.
Yeah.
Today it is 5%. Even with the unemployment rate rising, the saving rate has increased. And then Americans drove 12 billion miles less in June 2008 compared to June 2007.
Yeah, and it's gone down since then, too.
Yeah, so this tells us that we can change and change for the better, right? So if more and more people do this kind of stuff, then, I think we are in the right direction.
Do you ever have any people say that, hey, we're a consumer economy, you guys aren't consumers? What would happen to the economy if most people chose to live as you two do?
Oh, it'd be wonderful. It would just be so wonderful, because we wouldn't be doing boring, trivial work. And by, say, me pulling out of the workforce, I allow others who are underemployed to have more employment. So the promise of the whole modernity was that we'd have more free time, and we are actually having less time than a medieval peasant.
Yeah.
So finally we could get the promise of all this modernity would be to have more free time, more time with our families, more time to be of service to our community and the world. And we could solve so many problems by just having more freedom. And then the government could easily say, this month you can't work more than 35 hours. You can't go more than 65 miles an hour on the highway, and you can't work more than 35 hours. And then we have full employment. And then if unemployment rises, we go to 32 hours. And we can just adjust the employment. There's so many easy solutions to keep everyone working. And like the company, if the manager says, okay, look, this is really tight times, first the managers take a half cut of pay, and all the employees take 5% cut. No one gets fired, and we're going to all tighten our belts. The whole company be working like crazy to save to work and be productive.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of saying, well, the rich are going to keep it, and then all the poor go out of work.
There was just an actual economic analysis done that supports just what you said. If the economy doesn't grow, how do we cope? And it was essentially basically freezing the length of the work week to give to spread out the employment.
Yeah.
And that was the only one that seemed to allow for stability in a transition to a declining economy, a no growth and negative growth economy.
Yeah, that's what the planet needs, is a negative growth, because humans consume 123% of what the Earth generates every year. Mm-hmm. We're one species of 25 million, and we overconsume by 23%, and that's why CO2 levels rise at 2 parts per million per year.
Yeah.
Up from 270 parts per million 150 years ago. Now we're 387, going to 550 by 2100. And the climate scientists are saying, oh, this is totally not going to work.
Right.
And so the solution is we have a negative growth economy, and how do we then cope? It's by first helping the poorest of the poor planet-wide. The $700 billion bailout that we gave to the banks, that would have doubled the income of the world's poorest people for 7 years.
Yeah.
Now you're making $100 a year. Your salary goes to $200 a year per person if you're in the southern hemisphere and you're in the poorest billion people. That's going to take you out of poverty. You're not going to go to bed hungry 10 or 20 times this year.
Yeah.
We could have just eradicated world poverty instead of giving it to these banks. So this is how quick we could make this change. So you help the poorest of the poor so no one falls through the cracks. Then everyone up at the higher ranges start taking, scaling back.
Anything to add to that, Peter?
No, I think Jim said it well. And, even in my book, I kind of expected this counter-argument, right, on GDP. And I actually even included a section, right? So as long as the country chooses to measure its progress by GDP, then we are going to go in the wrong direction, right? Because GDP, as I pointed out and as Jim points out, it's not the right measure, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and the example I give is if I get sick, if I get diagnosed with cancer and I have to go for expensive treatments, that is actually good for the GDP. So you have more sick people like me, the GDP increases.
Right.
So, I mean, that shows, the major flaw in how we actually measure the progress of a nation.
Yeah, definitely. I'm thinking about, how quickly societies actually do change. And, like, for example, during World War II, it was unpatriotic to consume too much because the larger cause was fighting the war, and those resources had to go to the soldiers. So frugality was patriotic, and sacrifice for the greater good was patriotic. And then we've gone to this point where we have nominally become a nation of consumers, not citizens. And I'm wondering if social values might shift away from the greed is good mentality that has prevailed for the past few decades. And if so, what might the greater good become nowadays?
Well, my thought is it would be sustaining life on Earth and also eradicating poverty and also having world peace. The war-mongering America, we spend the equivalent of the total world, all the defense, I don't call it defense, offense spending, military spending on planet Earth right now, combined by every country, the U.S. equals it, is more than all the nations combined in military spending. And, so to get to a place of world peace, I think is so important for our kids' future and for the future of the planet. And then to solve the toughest problems, which are climate change, water, fisheries collapsing, forests depleting, all these things. And then, to me, that's a call to all of us. That's the biggest call I can imagine.
Yeah. Puts us all in the same boat,
Yeah.
Any thoughts, Peter, on that?
President Eisenhower, in his farewell speech, as he warned the citizens of the dangers of military-industrial complex, he stressed the importance of an alert and knowledgeable citizenry, right? So I emphasize the word alert and knowledgeable citizenry. So it's actually, at the end of the day, it's up to each of us, right, to make the change that we want to really see in the world. Because if all of us do our part, then ultimately we'll be able to change the direction our country is heading. And some of the stats that we kind of discussed earlier about Americans cutting back on their spending and driving less gives me some hope, right, that this change may come into effect, right?
Yeah.
At one point in time, the government was made of the people, by the people, for the people. Today is of the corporation, by the corporation, for the corporation. So hopefully down the road that will change.
Yeah, we definitely need it to.
But then for that to change, we need an alert and knowledgeable citizenry.
Well, that's why I want to really thank you guys, because that's really what your books have done and are continuing to do. And you're speaking out and being on this radio show. So I want to thank, let me let the listeners know again who we've been talking to. We've been talking to Jim Merkel and Peter Lawrence, and they chose to earn less money and live more simply. So Jim's book is called Radical Simplicity, Small Footprints on a Finite Earth, and you can go to radicalsimplicity.org. And Peter's book is The Happy Minimalist, Financial Independence, Good Health, and a Better Planet for Us All. And his website is thehappyminimalist.net. Hey guys, it's been a real pleasure having you on the air. A lot of wisdom, and it's obvious that you guys sleep well and have plenty of time to consider what you're doing and why, which is really nice. So thanks for being on the show. This has been the Reality Report, and I'm your host, Jason Bradford. And today's and previous shows can be heard online at globalpublicmedia.com. Thanks to our members and my studio engineer, Tim Gregory. And hey, Jim and Peter, signing off now. Really appreciate it.
All right.
This is wonderful.
And take care, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, everybody's going for the money, thinking it makes the world go round. But this whole world, it keeps turning on and on. Now when you're laying underneath the ground,